Welcome back to 7th Grade Mustache. On today's episode, we'll be speaking about EARTH-LYSIUM. In the year 2154, two classes of people exist. The very wealthy, who live in a pristine man-made space station called Elysium, and the rest, who live on an overpopulated, ruined Earth. Secretary Delacourt, a government official, will stop at nothing to enforce an anti-immigration law and preserve the luxurious lifestyle of the citizens of Elysium. That is the synopsis of the 2013 science fiction movie Elysium. But I am seeing the parallels here on Earth in modern day with the fires that are happening in Lahaina, Maui in particular. And there's other examples throughout history that remind me about this whole Elysium plot. So Lahaina began as a small fishing village, and in 1820, King Kamehameha made it the capital of the Hawaiian Empire. It remained the capital of Hawaii until King Kamehameha III moved it to Honolulu in 1840. Between 1795 and 1810, Kamehameha conquered Maui and all other islands and unified them into a single kingdom. Lahaina served as the center of the Hawaiian government for over 50 years until permanently relocating to Honolulu for its harbor. For most of the 1800s, Lahaina was a whaling port, and today it's still famous as a whaling port, mostly for whale watching. So on August the 8th of 2023, this year, there was a fire that started, and this fire started and burned almost the entire town. The town of Lahaina has a population of 13,000 people. 2,000 people were missing on August the 8th when this fire happened. This incident illustrates how very wealthy people with connections in the military-industrial complex use their influence and technology to decimate the property that belonged to indigenous property owners who refused to sell.
The people in Hawaii have refused for years to sell their land. And you got to remember that the whole island was stolen at one point, which, again, I get it. Some of these people signed their rights over for the whole pineapple thing, blah, blah, blah. This is like 50, 60 years ago. I get, but you got to understand, when somebody is misled, that's how they make the decision. And what's the first thing you learn? You can't sign a contract under duress, right? How many times have these people lost their land? And so these last people were not giving up that land. I wholeheartedly believe whenever you hear these people say everything from energy weapon to these fires are not natural, or the fact that they shut the water off, that we can't, because they said we were fighting the fires ourselves. They talked about the kids were released from school, but the parents were at work and couldn't get their kids. Now their kids are missing. I'm sorry, this sounds very diabolical, but this is the killing off of a bloodline. And there's one more thing I want people to listen that bugs me. This is that shit that we talk about off the air. This is the island. It's surrounded by water. They got water. Why the hell would they have shut the water off, if not just to make this shit burn or decimate the situation? Look, back in the day, we used to have a bucket brigade, and we fought fires on our own. And so you mean to tell me that couldn't have been done? Yeah, they shut the water off. They made it impossible for you to defend. The solution is offer loans to these people. Why would you offer loans to these people instead of just offer straight up aid? Hell, we got money for Ukraine. We got money for Haiti. We got money for all these other people. But then in this situation,
American citizens.
That's because
they're indigenous people. They're not white people.
No. That's part of it. They still want the land. So these people are that stubborn. So what they're going to do is they're going to offer you a loan for you to build your house back up. And then when you can't afford to pay it back because there's no work available, because they destroyed all the industry, now you lose your property naturally, And it goes, so yeah, trust me, they should be just they should just go in there with a bunch of trucks, a bunch of aid, start building people's shit back up for free. Insurance companies should pay. That kind of shit should happen, but it's not happening. Pay attention.
All right. So check it out. So this part of Maui, this small town called Lahaina, this town is covered by the Maui Emergency Management Agency. The head of that agency is a man named Herman Andaya. He has been under fire for not activating the disaster sirens during last week's fire response. He resigned on Thursday, citing health reasons. The system was created after a 1946 tsunami that killed more than 150 people on the Big Island. And its website says that they may be used for alerts for fires. 1 year earlier, on November 9th, 2022, 850 acres burned down. So this process of burning people off their lands
It's not new.
and then offering them loans so that they can rebuild, but at interest rates that are so high that make it impossible to pay off the loan in a timely manner. This is a practice of using laws and coercion
And the banking system
to take the land from these indigenous people. What you're seeing is the most blatant example of racism by the truest definition, using power and influence to oppress a group of people. This is when people talk about people being racist and this and that. No, that is prejudice. People are confusing prejudice and racism. This is racism because these are indigenous people who had children that were in school, and they let the kids out of school, and they didn't use the early warning system. And so the parents who were on the other side of town or on the other side of the island who were at work couldn't get to their kids in time to keep them away from this wildfire. These kids, not knowing any better or not knowing enough, probably ran into the wildfire trying to go into their house to save a family member or save some of their personal belongings. The kids were killed.
Yeah, they stated that some of these kids died. Look, we got to make this clear. Remember, if they're offering you a loan, your land is still the collateral. That's what makes this shit so fucked up. So I'm in a dire straits. Instead of you just giving me aid, you want me to use my land as collateral? That's because your land is what these people want. So if I kill your kids off, there goes your heirs. If I offer you a loan, and all of a sudden your property is no longer your property. And if you fail to pay it off, I end up, whoever, when I say I'm referring to the banking system, the corrupt American system, these elite people end up with your land that you would not sell to me naturally. So this wildfire, when they say it's not natural, not only is it not natural in its origin, it's not natural in what they want to happen afterwards. This is about land stealing. When you find out Oprah was buying land out there, you find out Zuckerberg was buying land out there, and Oprah couldn't even get the land, get that road built to her land. You know, there's so much going on here other than a damn wildfire. And Hawaii's not known for wildfires. And hey, let's not forget, on the West Coast, they got a hurricane about to hit California. They got a hurricane in the Pacific, which we were always taught Pacific didn't have that many hurricanes. But there's literally shit going on.
The Pacific doesn't have hurricanes. They have typhoons because it's something that comes from the ocean. You know what I'm saying? Dude, these artificial hurricanes are being done to deflect away from what is happening in Hawaii. It's meant to take your attention away. See, what's crazy about this is that we live in an age where the deeds of evil people are revealed faster and faster and faster. So fast that the corruption was exposed by Dr. Miles Stone, who published a book 2 days after the fire. Now, I'm not talking about pre-order, digital copy, a physical copy you can buy from Amazon. 2 days, 2 days, 2 days after the fires in Maui. This can only be possible if the book had been written well before the fires actually happened, months before the fires actually happened. Dr. Miles Stone is a guy who also wrote a book about Hunter Biden, painting him as some noble individual who's a victim of circumstance, blah, 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 woe is me, all this bullshit. So this guy is the guy they have to come and write these psyop puff pieces. So this book had already been planned because the fires had already been planned because they've been planning for a long time to get the people off of the land. Now, we can argue about method, and that's a waste of time, okay? You can say, oh, it's direct energy weapons, but we'll get into that. Or you can concentrate on motive. Concentrating on motive is more important because motive is, why are you trying to get these people off the land? What is your interest? How long have you been doing this? Who's involved?
Hold up. This is the shit we talk about when we're not on the air. Let's make it clear. How the fire started does matter a little bit, but it doesn't matter in the big picture. The big picture is, you're ushering natives off their land. indigenous people who have owned this land and their family for hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years. But that land is prime land that they were not willing to sell because they understood that we made that mistake in the past. We will not make that mistake again. Now, all of a sudden, you have these uncontrollable fires. You shut the water off because people were fighting these fires on their own. Look that shit up. They were having success. And then all of a sudden, somebody shuts the water off. Why would you shut the water off in the middle of a fire? It makes no sense unless you want the fire to win. See, that's the shit that you need to look at. And like I said, don't get me wrong. When these people talk about how the fire started, direct energy weapons, how these cars aren't working, there's other shit at play here.
Okay. My thing is, why would they turn off the water in the fire hydrants to prevent firefighters from putting out the fires?
People were fighting the fires with their own garden hoses. They were
unless some type of kinetic explosion would cause the water to burst and the island to flood and put out all of the fire. I gotta tell you about something, because I went to the Air Force's website and I went to the part of the Air Force Research Laboratory that talks about DEWs, direct energy weapons. Listen to me.
Where's the headquarters? Hold it, stupid Roscoe. Where's the headquarters for that? Because
but here's the deal. Here's the deal.
There's two headquarters. Yeah,
No. Well, so there's a headquarters in New Mexico, but there are installations around the world. And so the installation, there's what they call an optical installation in Maui. Now they're saying this quote unquote optical installation is an array of telescopes, and it's also a computer lab. I'm like, all right, well, that's cool, but you can configure computers to do anything, and you can configure optics to do anything. They're just a lens.
You also
optics talks about lenses. Yeah, it's a ground-based telescope. They also work with satellites. So then this thing can be fired from a plane. Now, this is the crazy part, dude. I downloaded some information and I started reading. So I'm going to read this white paper from the Air Force's website. So to start, it says, to fill capability gaps identified by warfighters, the DoD, Department of Defense, leads research and development efforts involving direct energy solutions. Two main classes of directed energy weapons, DEWs, exist. The first being HEL, high energy lasers. The second is high power microwave HPM systems. For both types of DEW systems, electromagnetic energy creates the desired effect on target. In contrast, bullets and bombs employ kinetic energy. For HEL systems, a beam of light creates an effect on the target. For HPM systems, the transmission of a short and extremely powerful burst of energy creates the desired effect. Laser technology has made significant leaps in both performance and maturity thanks to years of research. Now, since laser weapons have demonstrated the level of technical maturity necessary for air platform integration, they will support potential self-defense and offensive missions in the next decade. Listen to this part right here. In general, laser weapons offer warfighters unique opportunities for quick and precise target engagement, mission flexibility, and lighter, more responsive support logistics. The following capabilities make lasers attractive for operational users. Speed of light delivery. Laser weapons engage targets at the speed of light. You won't see it.
Well, hold it. What about the fact, one of the big complaints about the indigenous people is that these cars just shut down? That sounds like microwave to me.
That's exactly what that is.
If you're using microwave, it's going to fry your electronics.
It'll fry the circuits like an EMP almost.
Yeah. Now, if you got an old school car that's nothing but a carburetor, like say you got a 1970.
Anything made before 1984 with a analog ignition will start.
Yeah, you might still be able to drive, but that's the biggest complaint they had. Their cars were shutting down. That sounds like microwaves. And the other thing I want to point out that this is what happens when you underestimate people. You're dealing with Hawaiians. These motherfuckers deal with lava. They're not afraid of it. These people were fighting the fires themselves. That's why it was necessary to shut the water off. Because what happened was you were dealing with some people who ain't afraid of fire. You're dealing with some people that live by volcanoes.
Okay.
That have a history and a culture based on that.
Check it out. Check it out. Another aspect of these laser system capabilities is multiple target engagements and rapid retargeting. Laser weapon systems engagements only last for a few moments, which allow for the system to be constantly powered to move rapidly between targets and reload by recharging the electrical energy storage. So this thing can be mounted on a craft. So it's called the Demonstrator Laser Weapon System Beam Director. And it was tested for the Air Force Research Laboratory SHIELD Airborne Laser System. These things are on airplanes. They don't have to be on satellites. They can be on airplanes.
The whole thing is, if there's any airplanes flying during this fire, how come they ain't dropping water?
Hey,
how come?
Here's the crazy part. The Air Force sells weapons to foreign countries. Now, people say, well, the United States government wouldn't do nothing like that. Okay, so we can dance around that technicality, but if the United States government has sold that to a foreign country or individual that is unscrupulous, then he's the guy, like the Wagner Group and Blackwater, that you call to go and do the dirty work that the military won't do. So yeah, and these guys also have airplanes. So then all they have to do is get an older jet, mount this to it, fly over the area, pick your targets, bam, bam, and you started fires.
Like I said, you're dealing with culture that's not afraid of fire. They would have fought it. And that, like I said, it's important. You can tell that sometimes when somebody comes up with an idea that they're not giving enough credit to the people that they're like trying to fuck with, because, like I said, these people were fighting it. People were telling listen to these people. They tell you we were having success using our water hose. We were protecting our home. All of a sudden, the water shuts off. They're like, why did the water shut off? There's no reason for the water to shut off. It doesn't even make sense. So, look, I just think that this is one of these things where there's something in their land that these people want, that these elite people want, whether it's the government, whether it's rich-ass people, or whether it's some corporation. But there's something that we don't know. And we're not just talking about some prime real estate. I think it's something else going on, whether it's an element that we don't realize is valuable, in the coming future or what. But this is the shit we worry about. This is the shit we warn you about. You can't trust your government. You can't trust these elites because they're just greedy fuckers. They don't give a damn. They have no boundaries.
So, as we said, there's a lot of fuckery that's going on all at once. The crazy part about it is you can look at it at the micro or the macro level. On the ground where the fire is happening, there's no water available. They won't turn off the power. They won't turn the power off to keep the power lines from crashing and starting more fires. They're not using the early warning system. Those two things right there. If you turn off the early warning system and you turn off the water supply, you're trying to burn this place up and murder people.
Yeah, it exists for their protection. Look, every Wednesday, like one Wednesday a month, you're laying here in bed, they do the damn civil sirens here in America.
We grew up with that shit. I know what a tornado siren sounds like.
Yeah, so when we were kids, they used to do it on the weekend. Now somebody complains, so they actually test them on one Wednesday a month, which oddly enough, I ain't heard in a while. I'm looking at that shit myself. It's wild. See,
somebody complained. That was a rich person.
Well, hold it. There's always a correlation with what's happening in other places. The biggest mistake we make is that something happening over there can't happen over here. I'm telling you, it used to be once a month you would hear it on a Wednesday morning. I haven't heard it in a while. Now you're telling me that the civil service sirens did not activate when this fire was going on in Maui. And that fucks with me right now because I'm wondering if they ain't got some shit planned for us up here. You know what I'm saying? So that's the shit you got to worry about. The first thing, the basic shit they tell you that the sirens didn't go off, then they shut the water off. That is not negligence. That's intentional. That is, hey man, let these niggas burn. We want that land. If you burn up all the owners, if you kill the owners and you kill their kids because now they can't inherit it.
But now, even if the kids die, and the parents or family survives, you don't want to go back to that land where your babies died.
Because
so they hit you in the heart and they hit you in the pocket.
Yeah. This is so.
They hit you in the head. This is like boxing. They hit you in the head and the liver.
Now, again, I'm going to talk about my personal experience. When I was in Oklahoma, they had some wildfires, and I had to drive. I'm driving down the interstate because my house is in my apartment, not house. I couldn't afford a house in Edmond, but my apartment is in Edmond, Oklahoma. But I'm going to school in Langston, so I had to drive through Guthrie. It's about 25 miles or whatever to my apartment, and we dealt with fires a couple times. and you could feel that shit. You could see that shit, but also that fire pretty much after it passed over an area, only the fuel is was burning. So the stuff behind it, you got to deal with some, you got to deal with some maybe smoke, a little bit of heat. But once you got past that, you were just driving to your house. So that's why is this fire so devastating? It's hard for me to explain.
Why do you say the fuel?
When I refer to fuel, I'm referring to the dry grass and dry trees. So once it burns that, there's nothing behind it to keep burning. The fire is not burning behind it. The fire is going in a direction. And what the fuel is the dry grass that is burning. But once it burns once that fire, literally the fire is like about a foot wide, it's going in a direction.
Right.
It's direction.
But
it's directional.
Here's something that I'm thinking about right now. Is when powerful landowners want to clear the land.
Yes, they burn brush. That is correct.
Right. But if they found a way to do it without hiring people for labor, and they can do it from above, then why not just laser? Oh my God. These people are like some rich chick that wants to laser off the hair on her body.
Her back.
And the trees are the hair follicles.
Dude. When people do laser hair removal, watch it. The laser goes in a direction, it goes left to right, and once you've gone over that, you're only going towards the fresh growth. And that's what I'm saying is that when this fire happens, the fire travels in a direction. It's like a line. It's like
at some point it's going to come out that these fires in the Western United States, in Hawaii, all over, in Canada, in places that don't normally have these fires on such a recurring basis, they're going to find out that for years at a time, these fires were started artificially, first on the ground for a couple years, and then after from the sky.
The reason it's such a big deal is because for years they would when the fire would happen, like say there's a forest fire, they would trace it back to the origin, and they would always find some it was to a cigarette. Like, you find that cigarette in the fire, motherfucker, for real? But that's because, like I told you, the way a fire burns, it burns out from an origin, and then as it goes, the area behind it is just smoking. It won't catch fire again. You've already burned off that fuel. You already burned off that oxygen, whatever. So you got that wood sitting there that really won't catch on fire again. It might catch on fire in some spots where it didn't burn completely or it didn't burn deep, but most places, like I said, the fire goes in a direction, and it's not very wide. And once you realize that's how it works, so why is this so the point I'm making? Why is it so devastating in Maui? Why is it still burning and burning and burning and shit? That's not natural. When you have a regular fire, it burns and it goes in a direction, and the area behind it might be hot.
What is the point of turning the water off?
Other than
to prevent people from putting the fires out.
I'm just trying to tell you, when you look at how burned out those roads are, like I told you, I've driven through through a wildfire before in Oklahoma. I ain't seen no cars all lined up, grayed out and shit, look like ash shit in there. It doesn't burn hot enough to do that. A regular fire is not going to burn that hot. Now, if you got some fuel, like some gasoline or whatever on the ground or some shit, but those cars were not. Like I said, you got some people jump out their car every once in a while, but nah, my black ass. Remember, I had the Raider. I kept driving. I'm like, shit, fuck this. I'm cool. I'm going home, and I got ready for class the next day and drove back the next day. So I'm telling you, this fire thing, until you see it and experience it, how it really works, there's no way that the devastation is on that level in Maui and in Hawaii ain't right. It's too much. Too much damage. The damage is too great for just a regular fucking fire. It just is. And then when you got these people telling you, hey man, we seeing shit spark. The fire is over. We seeing shit spark back up again, or we're seeing intense heat in weird places. They're telling you something. That they're telling you that this shit ain't natural. And they're also, another thing, going back to the culture, if these people deal with volcanoes and deal with fires, they know what's not right. They're telling you, like, hey man, the piccolo player's a motherfucker. This ain't how this is supposed to happen. We've seen regular fires before. We've seen volcanic activity before. We've seen this, and we've dealt with it for generations. This right here, this is some intentional shit, and we can't tell you where it's coming from. we just throw the word government out there, but like you said, the government sells weapons to other countries, and sometimes it even sells it to the companies and corporations. So, suppose some company needed some kind of laser to clear off some land or something, and they bought it for whatever. DARPA would sell it to them. Now of course, like right now, I can go to the gun store and buy a flamethrower for $700. This flamethrower uses gasoline. There's another brush flamethrower I saw at the Amazon store the other day for $76. You put gasoline in it and you use it to get rid of brush. You get rid of small plants and shit. Yes, you can buy some extreme shit that could be used as a weapon. These are it's called gardening. This is stuff for gardening. But yes, you can use that shit as a weapon. That flamethrower at the gun store, $700. It goes on my AR. You can buy a flamethrower. So if you can buy that, who knows what else that's available if you have enough money or enough influence.
Let's talk about William Hamilton and the New York African Society for Mutual Relief. William Hamilton was born in 1773. He was a black carpenter, and they believe that he was the son of an African woman and Alexander Hamilton. So, in 1808, William Hamilton started the New York African Society for Mutual Relief with prominent black residents of New York City. The group purchased several acres between West 82nd Street to West 89th Street. By 1832, 10 homes were built. The black people had gardens, they raised livestock, they fished in the Hudson River for food, and got drinking water from a nearby spring. By 1850, there were 50 homes, 3 churches, a cemetery, and an all-black school. In 1845, there were 100 black men in the state that could vote. 10 of them lived in Seneca Village. In 1853, New York State passed a law that seized 775 acres of land in Manhattan to create the country's first ever public park. The plans took the land from the 59th Street area to the 106th Street area. The people of Seneca Village were given until 1857 to vacate the land. Some people filed lawsuits and kept their land, but every single suit was rejected. The only thing that remains of Seneca Village is a plaque that acknowledges that it once existed there. Have you ever heard of Seneca Village?
Yeah, okay. So Seneca Village was, if you go to Central Park, because Central Park is on top of Seneca Village, there is an obelisk in the middle of Central Park that makes no sense. Why is the obelisk? Why is this African? It's to tell you that that's where Seneca Village was. It's in Central Park. When you see that black obelisk, that's to let you know that they removed 50 families. They removed that whole, I don't even know how to describe it. That whole community was removed for Central Park to be built in Manhattan. Yeah, I know where the plaque is. I'm sorry to say I do know where, but it's on an obelisk. You can look that shit up. That's some sick shit, dude.
But this is another example of how people were removed from their land. And
for no reason.
Because they were black people. Yeah, well, I mean, you couldn't make it smaller. It had to be that damn big. Like, there were, you know what I'm saying, 50 homes there, and, like, you couldn't build it up to the homes and like, coexist with these people. Nope. Them niggas got to go.
And like you said, there were schools there. This was a community. This Seneca Village like I said, this is another example of people being run off their land. And here's nobody wants to admit that many times that these brown people, just because you're black doesn't mean that you came from slaves. But even if you do, we had homesteads, we had villages that were all ours. We were the first to settle many areas. And for the record, we had a podcast a year ago about black towns and black villages. And so, because the idea is that all you were a slave, and because you're a slave, you have no right to the land. That's not true. Many slaves settled land, and many of these black indigenous people. I remember in fourth grade when we talked about slavery, because we learned about it back then. But one of the first things they tell you is that these people used the indigenous people for slaves first. Then they brought the Africans in when the indigenous people died off because the conditions were too extreme. So once you realize, so there's going to be a mixture of the native people and these people that were brought in. And so that's the part that nobody ever wants to talk about. I remember this white dude kind of broke it down, the term hillbilly. And when he broke it down, I'm like, he said, you guys believe that hillbillies are just these racist people. No, hillbillies were the people from Appalachia that were native, poor white, and former slaves. And they all mixed together. That's why that term Melungeon exists. Hillbillies were Melungeons. They were a mixture of people that lived there, and they fought against the Klan. All of a sudden, somebody changes the narrative. Like I said, you got to be careful about these white folks because they'll pencil whip you. See, white folks like to pencil whip you. You ever, hey Roscoe, you ever play like dominoes with your uncle, and all of a sudden his nigga's up and he ain't won at all? That's pencil whipping. So they went on a campaign where they made it seem like the people, the hillbillies, the people that were in the Appalachian Mountains, were these racist people that didn't like black people, didn't like this, and none of that shit is true. And they break that shit down. In fact, that's what they told you back in the day, that Abraham Lincoln was Melungeon, which means he would be native, black, and poor white. And so, yeah, so when you hear that term hillbilly, you just think it's some bluegrass. Oh man, they hate black. That's not how hillbilly started. That's not where that term came from. And these are examples of people who lost their land. Also down south, people get. You know how you used to see the movie where people would pull out their shotgun, don't trespass? There's a reason for that. They're distrustful of the government. You see what's going on in Maui. You just heard about Seneca Village. And what about that village what about in 1933 when they find a Egyptian tomb in Tennessee? And so they find it in 1933, and they take all the archives out, but then they flood the area. They literally flood these. Why would they do that? Because they don't want you finding out what else is there. The bottom line is when you look that up in 1933, you find out they still have all that pottery, they still have all that stuff, and people's like, oh man, there were never no Egyptians over here. No, when you talk to the head Cherokee, he tells you that those are the tall people we ran them to the west. But why was it necessary to flood that area? Destroying black villages or destroying indigenous settlements is a big theme when you deal with this government, because if somebody was here before, because the narrative is America was just here for the taking. You had a couple light-skinned people running around, but that was it. That's not what America was. America has pyramids. America has settlements. America has books that were burned. Look that shit up. There's whole information that was burned because it was important for that narrative to be put out here that we're taking over this savage land. So now they're here for the resources. They were looking for gold. We know that, but they were looking for people. And even in Byrd's papers, Admiral Byrd, he states that the brown women would make good wives for these white men.
Check it out.
It was about conquest.
For over 10,000 years, the area known as Pennsylvania has been the homelands of the Lenape tribe.
10,000 years.
Yeah. The Lenape, or Delaware tribe, also called the Lenni Lenape, are of the Algonquin family and first lived in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York. Traditionally, they were divided into the Munsee, Unami, and Uloctigo, three social divisions determined by language and location. There are published accounts that speak of mariners, that's guys on boats, from Cape May and Atlantic counties, many of whom were free blacks, operating the Underground Railroad line into Greenwich, New Jersey. In the 1850s, fugitives traveled by foot from Cumberland to Cape May County, and Lenni Lenape guides assisted the runaway slaves. So, throughout this time, there was a lot of intermarriage of these escaped Africans and Lenape and Native American people. This happened in the north, this happened in the south. It went on and on and on. And for those who just think that's a fucking fairy tale, I for a fact, can tell you that it's real. Because at the
Oh,
age of 5 years old, at my Uncle Grady's funeral, I was standing there next to my father, and I saw these people that looked like dark-skinned, black, Native Americans. And I was so fixated on these
who the hell is
people.
that? Yeah,
They look
jet black.
completely different from everybody else there. Everybody else there looked West African, except for these people.
What?
These people showed up,
It's deep.
and they were black Indians, and I'm like, who are those people? Because to me, they look like somebody I'd seen at a museum in Nebraska. They look like somebody I'd seen on TV, Indians and stuff. And I'm like, who are these people? My dad was like, those are your people.
But my only issue is that we let her throw that term mixed, but so many of these people were dark to begin with. Like I always bring up Old Dirty Bastard, the Shinnecock tribe. Go look up the Shinnecock tribe of New York. They dark. Go look up the Chappaquiddick, the Chappaquiddick motherfuckers, the children of the first light, because they're the farthest east in America. Them motherfuckers is dark. So some of them people might have been mixed. Some of these Africans might have already been over here, but just the idea that everybody's all this pure shit. Last but not least, we always bring this up on our podcast. So when Thomas Jefferson made the Louisiana Purchase, he sent Lewis and Clark. But one of the motherfuckers he told, look for Dutch settlements, because the problem was supposedly there were Dutch already over here, and they had mixed with some of these native tribes. And so he must have found what he was looking for, because remember that nigga committed suicide twice, shot himself in the stomach and the head. I can't remember if it was Lewis or Clark. Please forgive me, I can't remember which one. But that's because if he had revealed that information, America would be different. Because because we love to buy up shit and shit like that. But you're saying there was already a white settlement over here that these people might have had a claim to that shit. But people were already here in America.
Lenape, meaning the people or true people, are the original native New Yorkers, and their home was known to them as Lenapehoking. The name Manhattan itself comes from their language. Where subways now rumble and skyscrapers soar, the Lenape harvested oysters, fished, and gardened. Today's
That was a big product back then in New York. I had no idea. Oysters was one of the main products from New York, and they're trying to get the motherfuckers back.
Yep.
That's craziness.
Today's West Village would have been the site of wigwam villages, while Broadway would merely have been a footpath.
I think the biggest issue is that there's so many Native American words that we take for granted, not realizing that tells you of his history, that stares you right in the face. We say Manhattan, but most of that East Coast shit are freaking Native American words.
Listen, most descendants now reside in Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Canada. But just 30 miles from Manhattan, a Native American Lenape tribe is still intact in New Jersey, still fighting for federal recognition as a legitimate tribe.
That's some sad shit. But the stealing of land is a narrative that goes on in America, and we need to recognize that shit.
The famous sale of Manhattan in 1626, which saw Dutch colonist Peter Minuit purchase the land from the Lenape, is a politically and historically muddy story told solely from the perspective of colonizers.
Look, this theme this has always been about. Here's my issue. I gotta say this correctly. White folks love to get mad when you talk about affirmative action. Fuck affirmative action. It sets people back. Affirmative action, and now you got a lot of black
crazy
folks saying,
is that you have black people like echoing this stuff now. But here's the thing, though. Like, anytime people push back and want to balance the playing field, you always have these white people that get pissed off and angry. No affirmative action. No reparations. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Well, I ain't got no fucking boots, so kick rocks.
Well, look, what people are missing is that when these Europeans came over and they started giving land to them, that was affirmative action. You gave land to the Europeans, but you took it from the natives. How come affirmative action works for you in the past, but it doesn't work for me in the present? That's my point. See, oddly enough, affirmative action only matters. Look, how about this? $5 Indians. How about that term? $5 Indians was when you went to these motherfuckers, these Dawes motherfuckers, these three brothers or two brothers, and you said, "Hey, look, I want to spend $5 to become part of that tribe," and they accepted the shit. That's affirmative action. That you're letting in a minority into a majority setting. You're letting a white man into an Indian. Like I said, affirmative action works when it's the white people, but when it's somebody else, it's a handout. I have a problem with that. And the fact
hold on. There's another example of that. The Ojibwe Indian had the same problem, and there was an uprising. So then the U.S. government would allow white women to marry into this Native American tribe, but it would not let the males marry white women off the reservation. So the white woman had more rights on an Indian reservation than Native American men or Native American women did outside of the reservation.
So what you're saying, white women were allowed to come on the reservation and marry, but these Native men were not allowed to come
because they knew that would dilute the race, that would dilute the tribe.
But also what that did was it gave the mixed kids provenance on the reservation,
which they could then get these kids and manipulate them. So
sell them shit, offer them shit.
Mm-hmm.
We see it all the time. Look, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that we never had land. Black folks had land. Native Americans had land. And so many times you see now in modern times that land was stolen, straight up stolen, and that's the problem when they don't want to teach real history. DeSantis in Florida, in Texas, there is a family that there is a massacre in Texas where they took them people's land and people are still fighting for it. Those people were forced to go to Louisiana. Those families still exist. Now they put a plaque up, but I'm gonna tell you right now, fuck you and your plaque. Wipe my ass with your plaque. Give me my money or give my land back. Now here's where it gets crazy. Like I said, we know this about 3 years ago in California. Them people got that land back. Those black folks that own that resort land, whatever it was, worth 200, 300 million, they got their land back because it was taken illegally. So Texas doesn't want to teach you about slavery or teach you about these different massacres because they want that to stay in the past. That is for you. So you white folks understand, and these black folks and whatever, that is affirmative action. So you're going in, changing the history books to state that these massacres never took place. That is affirmative action. Because what you're saying is, when I got the land, it was okay. But if you want your land back, that doesn't exist anymore. We all know about Rosewood. We all know about these places. But like I said, when you got this governor of Florida, DeSantis, who doesn't want that shit taught in schools, it's because they don't want these native people to come back and take back their resort land. They don't want these people to come back and take back this is prime real estate that might have been stolen. It might be some fucking oceanfront property. That's where this shit is kicking in. Because if you go back 4 or 5 generations, you'll find out, okay, this was robbed from them.
Check this out. So that standoff that I was talking about was a 78-day land dispute between a group of Mohawk Indians in the town of Oka, Quebec, Canada. And this happened July 11th, 1990. It didn't happen in the 70s.
Oh, shit. Please proceed. I didn't know. Maybe I didn't hear about this one.
Yep.
But like I said, whenever I give this example, people.
So hold on. Wait a minute. So it took place in the community of Kanesake, near the town of Oka, on the north shore of Montreal, and related protests and violence occurred in the Kanawake Reserve to the south of Montreal. The crisis was sparked by the proposed expansion of a golf course and the development of townhomes on the disputed land in Kanesatake that included a Kenyan Hake burial ground. Tensions were high, particularly after the death of a Corporal Marcel Lemay, a Quebec police officer. Eventually, the army was called in and protests ended. The golf course expansion was canceled and the land was purchased by the federal government. However, it did not establish the land as a reserve, and this has since been there has since been no organized transfer of land to the Mohawks of Kanesatake. So the land in Maui, they got burned. the government says they're going to take the land. They're going to take the land in development. Now, what's going to happen? That means it's going to be fascism, where corporations and governments work together and at their own interest, and the corporations will buy the land, and they'll then sell it to a realtor, who will then drive up the prices astronomically, and rich people will buy it. Now, there's already tension there on the island because there's so many tourists there that the local indigenous people, they have, all these tourists just coming and like invading their areas, but they don't want them motherfuckers. They don't want those tourists. Like, dude, like, this is our place. Like, we don't want you here.
Yeah, we want your money in certain areas, but we don't want you coming. This is off the beaten path. This is not for your consumption. This is not everything is meant for public consumption. And when you say that, people get offended. Not everything is for you to see. I don't need you staring at my ancestors. Fuck that shit.
It's called gentrification, man. Okay? That's what the fuck it is. But check it out. Let's talk about Oscarville, Georgia. The town of Oscarville was founded after the Civil War by recently enslaved Africans. The town had 1,100 black residents that managed to build a healthy community with churches, schools, and small businesses. On September 5th, 1912, a 22-year-old white woman named Ellen Grice claimed 2 black men tried to rape her, but were unsuccessful because they were scared away by her mother. The Forsyth County Sheriff arrested 5 black men for the alleged assault. News of the attack and arrests caused quite a stir in the surrounding black communities. A vocal black preacher named Grant Smith appealed to the sheriff to release the men. He claimed there wasn't much evidence to hold all 5 men accountable for the assault, and also suggested that one of the men could have already been in a consensual relationship with Grice. Many whites were outraged by Smith's allegations, and an angry mob beat and horse-whipped the preacher on the steps of the courthouse, almost taking his life. Horse-whipped him. 60 years after slavery ended. A week later, on September 12th, 1912, an 18-year-old white woman named May Crow was raped and beaten in the Big Creek community of Forsyth County, Georgia. The next morning, Crow's body was found half-naked, bloody, and hidden under a pile of leaves. Her skull had been bludgeoned with a stone, and she was alive and barely breathing. Searchers would allegedly find a small pocket mirror at the scene of the crime that was said to belong to Ernest Knox, a 16-year-old black boy from Cumming, Georgia. Knox was arrested at his home and then subjected to a mock lynching, which led to his coerced confession for the attack on Crow. As word spread of the attack on Crow and the confession by Knox, whites became increasingly angry. It wasn't long before a lynch mob formed in front of a jailhouse where Knox had been detained. Officers had to sneak Knox out the back door late that evening just to keep him from being hanged. He was taken to a jail in Atlanta for his protection, but would soon stand trial for the attack. The next day, 4 additional men, Oscar Daniel, Robert Edwards, James Daniel, and Ed Collin, were arrested and taken into custody. All of them black. Soon, another angry mob of more than 2,000 whites has stormed the county jail. Gaining access to the cells, they shot and killed Robert Edwards, dragged his body from the jailhouse, and hung him from a telephone pole in the town square. Ernest Knox, Oscar Daniel were both found guilty of rape of May Crow. They were sentenced to death by hanging, even though it is illegal in the state by law at the time. 8,000 whites congregated in the town square of Cumming to watch the 2 teenage boys get publicly hanged for an alleged crime they never fully had the opportunity to fight. It was after this hanging that the terror would begin to spread as a white group of terrorists known as the Night Riders would make it their mission to run every black person out of town that they came across. Oscarville would end up being one of their main targets. Over the short period of just a few years, 98% of its black residents would end up either leaving their homes or being murdered for refusal to move. Black property deeds found their way into the hands of white neighbors without any bill of sale or transfer. This effectively allowed many whites to steal the land once owned by their black counterparts when they were driven out by the Night Riders. More than 1,100 blacks would lose their livelihood, and in little time, the once functioning African-American town of Oscarville would be a ghost town. Over time, pieces of the land would be sold to the government, and by 1950, a plan to build Lake Lanier was in full effect. Soon the entire town of Oscarville would be underwater, intentionally flooded in conjunction with the Beaufort Dam to support the growing demand for water supply to nearby cities. The resulting reservoir, named after Sidney Lanier, a poet and musician who was also a Confederate private. In the end, construction would destroy more than 50,000 acres of farmland and displace more than 250 families. It would also relocate 20 cemeteries and their corpses in what some may see as an attempt to erase the sins of the past.
Look, for years I never understood the flooding of black towns, but now I get it now. If you flood that area, even if their descendants make a claim, you got a claim to what? They're not going to remove that lake and let you have the land back, are they? That is about legacy. That's about destroying a legacy where nobody can come back and ever right that wrong. That's what that shit is. You got to understand why the Second Amendment is so important. They sit here and do this shit to you. They got you marching. They got you surrendering your guns. They got you believing that intelligent people don't have weapons. But you see the Night Riders. See, these people sat here and ran you off your land. Then your neighbor claimed it, and then they sold it to the government. And you ain't got no recourse because they put a fucking lake on top of your ancestry land. Now, they moved a couple gravestones. So there's two things I want to bring up right now. First things first. I saw this video with this white chick, but I heard this years ago. We all know back in the day, there used to be cemeteries on our land. If you bury your loved one, you do realize that they can't take your land because it's now zoned as a graveyard. And now you don't have to pay taxes on it. And even if you say they foreclose on your house, they still can't take your land because it's like an Indian burial ground. They literally can't take it. So for all these new people, if you want, bury your loved ones on your family land just to protect your land from being taken. Number two, you sit here and here's what bugs me, and this is about white supremacy. Me and you talk about it off the air. There's only 3 or 4 movies where you see the Klan get their ass kicked, right? You got the Django, you got a couple movies, from the 70s, but you very rarely see the Klan get their just due. But I think it's kind of odd. How many Nazi movies are out there where Nazis get beat up, made fools of, and everything else? Thousands. That's because Jews run Hollywood. That's what it is. But we, as black people, we got to make our own movies. We got to control that narrative. But the truth of the matter is, there are so many stories. We talked about it on 3 podcasts ago. The Lumbee tribe. They're the ones from North Carolina. The Grand Wizard from South Carolina decided to come up there and have rally, and they beat the shit out the motherfuckers. So we've always dealt with terrorism the one way you can, and that's by beating somebody's ass, taking their arms, doing that shit. But instead, we want gun control because of New York, Chicago, and LA. No, the only way to stop this shit is to defend yourself. And unfortunately, these poor people in Hawaii and Maui can't defend themselves from some weird shit that we don't know what it is. But if you're dealing with terrorists, you got to have a gun to protect yourself. These Night Riders were terrorists. These motherfucking the Sons of Confederacy, those are terrorists. The motherfucking Ku Klux Klan are terrorists. And these Proud Boys are terrorists. The only way that you can defend yourself is to physically fight these motherfuckers. Sometimes you got to fight in a courtroom. Sometimes you got to fight in the ring. Sometimes you got to fight. But if you ain't got no weapon, you can't defend your land and keep your land. And please, black folks, do this research. Stop thinking that your aunt and uncle sold that land off or your grandparents sold that land off, because it might have been taken through ill-gotten means.
All right, we're going to end this on a positive note. In December of 1999, a series of demonstrations over water rights, characterized by widespread police violence and cross-demographic protests, became known as the Cochabamba Water Wars. The Bolivian government had contracted Agua del Tenari, a consortium of companies that included the U.S. construction giant Bechtel, to administer water provision in the city of Cochabamba and surrounding countryside. The new company dramatically increased water rates for municipal customers and took over autonomous drinking water systems in neighborhoods on the city's outskirts and irrigation networks in farming communities, and charging these new customers to use water systems they had built and paid for themselves. In response, water users from across the region occupied streets, highways, erected barricades, and held mass assemblies and rallies. Rather than negotiate, the government dispatched soldiers and police who unleashed tear gas, clubs, and bullets against protesters and bystanders alike. Undeterred, the protesters regrouped and their numbers grew. In April 2000, the Bolivian Congress rescinded the 1999 law that permitted water privatization, and Hugo Banzer, former dictator turned elected president, canceled the government's contract with Aguas del Tenari. Over the next 5 years, Bolivians protested water privatization in other cities, foreign control over natural gas, coca eradication, and other policies like tax increases that increase the cost of living. Social movements around the country took up with Cochabamba activists and their call for a constituent assembly that would transform Bolivia into a more just and democratic nation with a new constitution, which had a proposal first made by lowland indigenous groups. Through grassroots mobilization, strikes, roadblocks, rallies, and marches from the highlands to the valleys to the lowlands, social movements built enough power to defeat neoliberal policies on the ground and then neoliberal political parties at the polls. Well, how about them apples? Those people got in the streets and made the shit happen. They didn't sit around talking about it. They took action. They saw these outsiders attempting to privatize their water supply and charge them for their own water. You hear about this all the time, manifesting in different ways. These people will come in, bringing in these fascist, entities, and attempt to control natural resources. Now, in this episode, we talked about land, we talked about water, and we talked about how racism is manifesting in the form of fascism. How the government and corporations together are eliminating these people in Maui, in Lahaina, Hawaii. How it happened, the fascism happened in Seneca Village. They wiped out the black village, and now this phallic symbol sticks out the ground. That's the only thing that remains of them in the park. Oscarville, which was wiped out. And I'll bet you these white women who claimed to get raped, there was a psyop. It wasn't real. That this was done on purpose to get a bunch of white people riled up, to get those black people out because they knew they were going to build a dam, and the only way they could do it is by running them off their land. And they took the deeds from these dead black people and signed it over to themselves, and then they got a windfall of money when the company paid them for the land that they stole from these black families. So there you go. That is how these Bond villain motherfuckers are walking around today. How Cobra Commander and Cobra are real today. They're using lasers from planes to start fires to drive people off their land. These Bond villains are now real things, man. That's the world we live in, where Cobra is real and Bond villains are real.
Ain't shit we can do about it, right? Nope. You got to keep fighting. Stop convincing yourself the government's going to swoop in and take care of you. And don't trust the government either, because, like I said, they're buying up this land, and they created a lake on top of somebody's ancestors, not giving a damn. Oh, yeah, they moved the cemetery, but there's other reasons they moved the cemetery. That's so they can say that this land
Look, whether it's a lake or whether it's a city park or whether it's going to be these sprawling plantation mansions for the wealthy people, it doesn't matter. It's still getting rid of indigenous people for white wealth. And then they want to put a fancy, slick face on it and make it look like it's all great and it's all good.
Like they couldn't build these homes anywhere else. Look.
Fight the power. That's all I got. We out. Peace.
Holla back.